You're watching someone you love shut down. Not all at once, slowly, brick by brick. The messages that take longer to answer. The Sunday lunch that was cancelled for the third time in a row. The spark in their eyes that was gradually replaced by a weary politeness, by short answers, by a way of being in the world that feels more like absence than presence. You observe and do not know what to do. You do not know whether to speak, whether to wait, whether to ask directly, or whether to respect the silence. And deep down there is a fear you can barely name. The fear that if you do not do the right thing, you will lose this person in a way that has no turning back. If you recognize this situation, this video was made for you. Not to give you a script on how to fix someone, that does not exist and does not work, but to show you what neuroscience and the scriptures say about what actually works when someone is closing themselves off. And there is an error that most people make at this time, a well-intentioned error full of love, that inadvertently widens the gap instead of narrowing it. I will show you what that error is and what to do instead. And before continuing, if someone in your life is showing serious signs, talking about no longer wanting to be here, about being a burden to those they love, about seeing no way out, this is the moment to involve professional support. A psychologist, a trusted doctor, the CVV, which operates 24 hours a day via the number 188. Presence and relational care have real power, and you will understand this throughout this video, but in severe crises, they act alongside specialized support, not in place of it. Keep that in mind. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. The content here is different, deeper, more honest. Subscribe and activate the bell. Let's start with what is happening on the inside of the person you are observing.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.
Because to be a genuine presence, you need to understand the mechanism, not to diagnose, but to stop interpreting their behavior through the wrong lens. When a person begins to progressively isolate themselves, the automatic response of those observing from the outside is to interpret this movement as rejection, as coldness, sometimes as ingratitude. You offer conversation and they do not respond. You invite them and they decline. You try and it seems to have no effect. And what your brain does with this sequence of perceived rejection is completely natural. It begins to retreat as well. It begins to space out the attempts. It begins to respect the silence in a way that gradually becomes absence. But here is what researchers from IPEA, who study social isolation and mental health in Brazil, have consistently documented. Progressive isolation is rarely a genuine preference. In most cases, it is a protection. The person who is closing themselves off is not rejecting you. They are managing an internal load that currently exceeds their capacity to expose themselves, to be seen, to maintain the expectations that relationships carry, even loving relationships, even the most secure ones. Closing off is a form of preservation when the internal system is overloaded. Stanford University published research on the impact of isolation on the autonomic nervous system that revealed something that should change the way we all interpret the withdrawal of others. The brain of a person in acute suffering interprets the silence of those they love as confirmation that they are in fact a burden. It is not paranoia. It is the nervous system in threat mode, processing absence as evidence. Every message you did not send, Every invitation you stopped making to respect their space is processed by their system, without intention on your part, as further proof that their withdrawal was the right decision. This means that respecting silence is not neutral. In certain circumstances, it is the most well-intentioned mistake you can make. But the other extreme, pressuring, insisting, bombarding with messages, forcing conversation, also does not work. Because a nervous system in overload does not process pressure as care. It processes it as more demand. And more demand is exactly what it is trying to protect itself from managing. So what is the middle path? And it is here that the scriptures deliver an answer that contemporary psychology is rediscovering with a different vocabulary. There is an episode in the book of Job that rarely receives the attention it deserves. Most people know Job as the story of the man who lost everything and remained faithful, and then God restored double to him. But there is a detail in chapter 2 that is possibly the most sophisticated scene of emotional support in the entire Bible. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, heard of what had happened to him, they traveled from afar to be with him. And when they arrived and saw him, they hardly recognized him. Pain had physically transformed him. The text says they tore their robes, sprinkled dust on their heads, cultural gestures of shared mourning, and then did an extraordinary thing. They sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, without saying a word, because they saw that his pain was too great. 7 days in silence, not absence, not distant respect, constant silent physical presence without an agenda. The Christian tradition and pastoral care scholars from UFRJ, who research social support in context of grief, identify in these 7 days the most precise description of what contemporary psychology calls co-regulation of the nervous system, the process by which the calm and constant presence of another person literally helps the nervous system of the one in suffering find a more stable state, not through words, through presence. Job's problem with his friends came later, when they opened their mouths, when they began to explain, analyze, diagnose, point out causes, suggesting there was something Job had done to deserve what he was going through. And Job said to them in chapter 16 with a frankness that cuts, "Miserable comforters are ye all, miserable comforters." The most literal translation is, "You are an extra burden to me." The attempt to help became one more load. Job's friends did not stop loving Job when they began to speak. The love was there. The problem was the model of help, the belief that presence without words is not enough, that love without a solution is not doing its job. This belief made them replace what was working, shared silence, constant presence, with something that relieved their own discomfort, not Job's. Click the like button now if this is touching on something real you have experienced, whether as the one who needed presence or as the one who tried to help the wrong way. This gesture helps more people find this content. There is a word in Hebrew that is at the heart of this entire conversation, a word that appears more than 200 times in the Old Testament, and that no single word in English can completely capture. The word is hesed, chesed, translated as mercy, kindness, loyal love, grace. Chesed in its essence describes a type of love that does not depend on reciprocity to continue existing. It is the love that remains when the other person has nothing to offer in return, when they are not well enough to be grateful, to respond, to acknowledge what they are receiving. Chesed is the love that pursues, that remains, that does not count the cost. Not because it is naive, but because the continuity of love is not conditioned on the continuity of the return. The scriptures use chesed to describe God's love for Israel in the moments when Israel was most distant, most closed off, most incapable of responding. It is not a love that waits for the situation to improve to then draw near. It is a love that draws near because the situation is not well. And this model is not just theological. It is what the Relationship Psychology Research Group at PUCRS calls non-conditional responsiveness, the capacity to offer support without that support depending on visible progress, expressed gratitude, or immediate reciprocity. And the data shows that non-conditional responsiveness is the strongest predictor of recovery in relationships in crisis, not the quality of the advice offered, not the intensity of the care, the non-conditional constancy. Chesed in human form, materialized in the relationship. Now I need to take you to the story that for me is the most complete representation of Chesed in the entire biblical narrative. Not between God and a people, between two ordinary people in a circumstance of absolute loss. Naomi had lost her husband and her 2 sons. She was in a foreign land. She decided to return to Bethlehem, her land of origin, and instructed her 2 daughters-in-law to return to their own mothers' houses to rebuild their lives. It was a rational, generous, sensible instruction. She had nothing to offer them. There was no prospect of a future in the terms a young daughter-in-law would need. Orpah wept, embraced her and left. Ruth stayed. And when Naomi insisted, "Return, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods," Ruth spoke one of the densest phrases in the entire Bible. In Hebrew, the cadence is almost musical in the way each line closes a possible exit for withdrawal. "Entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God." Observe what Ruth did not say. She did not say, "I will stay until you get better." She did not say, "I will stay because you will need practical help." She did not condition her staying on any expectation of recovery or return. She declared orientation, not duration. "Where you go, I will go," present continuous, no exit clause. And Naomi, at that moment, was in no condition to receive this love with full gratitude. She was in mourning. She arrived in Bethlehem and said to the women of the city, "Call me not Naomi," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. She was closed off, redefining her own identity through pain. And Ruth did not debate this. She did not correct Naomi's theology. She did not say, "You shouldn't call yourself bitter." She stayed. She woke up early the next day and went to work to support them both. Chesed in action, not in discourse. Naomi's recovery, and she does recover profoundly as the book unfolds, does not begin with a revelatory conversation. It begins with Ruth going out to work while Naomi was still closed off. Constant and practical presence preceded the opening. Ruth's chest created the soil. Naomi flourished in her own time at her own pace. Right now in the comments, "I remain." It is not just a reference to Ruth. It is a declaration about your own position before the one you love who is closing themselves off at this moment. You are signaling to yourself the model you have chosen. Right, I remain. Now I need to talk about the specific error that the most committed, most loving, most present people usually make. And it is an error that comes exactly from the intensity of love, which makes it difficult to recognize as an error. The error is turning presence into a project. You start with the genuine intention of being present, but gradually, without realizing it, your presence begins to have an agenda. You are there, but you are evaluating. Is she getting better? Is he responding? Is my presence having an effect? And when the answer seems to be no, when the person remains closed, remains quiet, remains without showing the signs of improvement you expected, you feel what researchers at Harvard Medical School call compassion fatigue, an emotional exhaustion that occurs when the caregiver links their own emotional state to the progress of the other. And when compassion fatigue sets in, one of 2 things happens. Either you increase the pressure, more questions, more attempts, more interventions, because the internal urgency grows, or you retreat, because the emotional investment without visible return becomes unsustainable. Both movements communicate the same thing to the person who is closed off. My presence here is conditional on my progress. And this perception, even if completely mistaken regarding your intention, confirms what their nervous system was already processing as truth, that they are a burden, that withdrawal was the right decision, that protecting the people around them means continuing to close off. The difference between presence as a project and presence as chest is subtle but decisive. Presence as a project has an expectation of result. Presence as chest has orientation, not expectation. You are there not because you expect it to produce a specific change in a specific time frame. You are there because it is where you chose to be, and that choice is not revised at every cycle of progress evaluation. This does not mean you do not take care of yourself in the process. It means that the care you offer is not tied to a result marker that is not under your control. The research group on behavior and health from Nature Human Behavior published a study that followed support networks in periods of prolonged crisis and identified that the people whose emotional state remained most stable throughout the process and who therefore remained as more consistent support were those who had clearly separated their own well-being from the progress of the person supported, not with coldness, with healthy distinction. They remained present, but their presence did not depend on a response to be renewed. This has a name in the Greek of the New Testament. The word is paraklesis, translated as consolation, encouragement, exhortation, but at its root, paraklesis comes from para, beside, and kaleo, to call. Literally, to call to oneself, to be summoned to stand beside. The Holy Spirit is described in John 14 as the Parakletos, the one who is called to stand beside, not to solve, not to fix, not to eliminate the problem, to remain beside while the process happens. Paraklesis is the model of presence you are being called to offer, not the model of Job's miserable comforter, not the model of the recovery project with a deadline, the model of the Parakletos, summoned to stand beside for an indefinite time without an agenda of results. Activate the bell now so you don't miss the next episode, because in the next video, I will talk about something that directly complements what we are discussing: how you sustain your own internal stability when you are being a presence for someone in suffering, because those who care also need firm ground to keep standing. Activate the bell. But I need to be completely honest with you about the limits of what we are describing, because love, chest, and paraklesis are powerful, and they are insufficient alone in certain situations. When a person's closing off includes signs that go beyond isolation and sadness, when they talk about being a weight to those they love, when they mention it would be better not to be here, when you notice they are saying goodbye to things and people in a way that makes no sense given the context, when behavior changes radically and quickly, these are signs that require the involvement of specialized support, not in place of your presence, alongside it. This is not abandoning the person to a cold system. It is the most honest chest you can offer, recognizing that the care they need at this moment exceeds what relational love alone can deliver, and acting from that honesty. You can accompany them to a psychologist. You can call the CVV together with them at 188, which works 24 hours. You can talk to a trusted doctor about what you are observing. This is presence. This is Ruth going to work early in the morning, doing what needs to be done so that the person you love has access to what they need. The distinction is not always obvious, but when you have doubt about whether what you are seeing is a crisis that requires specialized support, erring on the side of excessive care is always the right choice. A call to CVV harms no one. Omission can. Now for the practical steps. Concrete, applicable, starting today. The first step is to show up without an agenda. This is harder than it seems. Showing up without an agenda means that the criterion for continuing to show up is not the person's progress. You send the message not to check if they are getting better, but because you are thinking of them and want them to know it. You make the invitation not expecting them to accept this time, but so they know the invitation remains open. The frequency of showing up creates what researchers call perceived relational security, the perception that the relationship is stable regardless of their emotional state at that moment. A short message without pressure for a response, sent regularly, does more than a long and intense conversation sent when you are in a state of urgency. Regularity communicates constancy. Occasional intensity communicates anxiety. The second step is to listen without fixing. When they finally speak, and at some point they will speak because the human being was not made for total silence, the impulse will be to respond with a solution, with perspective, with, but you need to see the positive side, or you've been through worse, or do this and it will get better. Resist, not because these things are wrong, because it is not what is being asked for. What is being asked for when someone who was closed off begins to speak is a witness, someone who receives what is being said without immediately trying to transform, correct, or resolve it. That sounds very heavy, is a response. "You will get over this" is also a response, but it is a response to the discomfort of the listener, not to the need of the speaker. The difference is subtle and decisive. Ask yourself before responding, is what I am about to say for them, or is it to relieve my own discomfort in the face of what I am hearing? The third step is to honor their pace without being a hostage to it. Chesed is not you dissolving your own life in the wait for the person to open up. It is you keeping your presence available while living your life, because your stability, your joy, your continuity of living is part of what you have to offer. A person in suffering who observes someone they love living with wholeness, not in a performative way, not with the anesthetic happiness of someone pretending everything is fine, but with genuine continuity of purpose, receives the message that life has substance beyond the crisis, that there is a this side that continues to exist and is waiting when they are ready. The fourth step is to name what you see, with care and without diagnosis. There is a moment when the relationship allows, where naming with gentleness what you are observing is more powerful than silence. Not, "I think you are depressed," or "You are sabotaging yourself," but, "I noticed you've been quieter lately, and I want you to know that I am here without haste, without demanding anything." Naming without judgment, observation without a verdict, this communicates that you see and that what you see has not driven you away. This simple gesture, being seen without being judged, is what the Hebrew tradition captures in the word shalom. Generally translated as peace, shalom in its semantic root describes wholeness, completeness, the state of nothing being missing or fragmented. When you offer presence without an agenda, listening without fixing, constancy without condition, you are creating around another person the conditions for shalom to be possible. Not the peace of the absence of problems, the peace of relational wholeness. The peace of knowing there is someone who is on your side while the process happens. The fifth step, and this is the most important, is to take care of your own soil. You cannot be chaste for someone from a place of emptiness. The research from PUCRS on informal caregivers, those people who sustain someone close in suffering without the support of a professional structure, is clear. The variable that most predicts the sustainability of care in the long term is not the intensity of love. It is the quality of care the caregiver receives from other relationships, from spiritual practices, from spaces for emotional discharge. You need to have a place to recharge what you are offering, not out of selfishness, because exhausted presence is not genuine presence. It is a performance of presence, and the difference is felt. Take care of yourself, not as an alternative to caring for the person you love, as a condition for that care to be sustainable. Let me tell you what is at stake here on a broader level. We live in a culture that has confused care with fixing, that has confused love with a solution. That makes people feel that if they cannot solve the problem of those they love, they are failing as friends, as family, as a community. And this confusion produces exactly what we saw in Job's friends, people full of love and genuine intention who, because they cannot bear the impotence of not being able to fix things, replace silent presence with unasked for advice, and become an extra burden for those who are already overloaded. The theology of the Incarnation, the central mystery of Christianity, that God became flesh and dwelt among us, is not just a statement about divine nature. It is a model of care. God did not solve the human condition from a distance. He came to dwell. He stayed. He experienced what it is to be human from the inside. The word the evangelist John uses to describe this, eskinosen, literally means pitched his tent among us. He did not visit. He camped. This is the model, not the visit that resolves and leaves. The camp, the tent pitched alongside. And there is a name for this principle in Hebrew that encapsulates everything we discussed today. The word is imanv, Imanu, which you know in the compound form Immanuel, God with us. Not God above us, providing from afar. Not God ahead of us, pointing the way. God with us in the same circumstance, in the same moment, on the same ground. Immanu is the theology of presence, and the mission this episode places before you is not to save anyone, because that is not within your reach, and it is not your role. The mission is to be Immanu, to be with, to pitch the tent alongside, to offer chesed that does not calculate cost, to be paraklesis, the one who was called to stand beside while the process happens, to let shalom be possible not by the absence of crisis, but by the constant presence of someone who chose not to leave. If this video touched on something you are living, as someone trying to be a presence or as someone who needed that presence at some point, share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for a person is to place in their hands the content that names what they are feeling. You can be the messenger. Share it. Versen Dios teases was por 3 days Sausada. Let me close with what you have learned here. You learned that progressive isolation is rarely a genuine preference. It is the protection of an overloaded system, and that the silence of those who love, even if well-intentioned, can be processed by the nervous system of the sufferer as confirmation that withdrawal was the right decision. You learned that the 7 days of silence from Job's friends were the best 7 days, and that the problem began when they opened their mouths to fix what was not asking to be fixed. You learned that chesed is the love that does not depend on reciprocity to continue, that Ruth declared orientation, not duration, that she appeared early in the morning to work while Naomi was still closed off, and that Naomi's recovery flourished in the soil that Ruth created with her constancy. You learned that the difference between presence as a project and presence as paraklesis is the presence of an agenda, and that when you link your emotional state to the progress of the one you love, you eventually become a miserable comforter, out of love, without intention, but with the same effect. You learned that when signs are serious, honest chesed includes involving specialized support, because recognizing the limits of relational care and acting from that honesty is one of the deepest forms of love that exist. And you learned that the theology of the incarnation is a model of care, not visiting and solving, but pitching the tent alongside, being Immanuel, being with. Now what do you do with this? You show up, without an agenda, without a deadline, without an expectation of a result controlled by you. You send the message not to check progress, but so they know you thought of them today. You listen without fixing when they speak. You take care of your own soil so that your presence is sustainable. And when necessary, when the signs ask for more than relational presence, you act with the most honest chest. You seek together the support that exceeds what love alone can deliver. This is the mission, not to save, to remain, not to fix, to be with. Immanuel.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.